You're listening to Unreggular Radio. The following program is mature content intended for adults only. The views, opinions, and thoughts expressed here are not necessarily those of Unreggular Radio, its staff, or its affiliates. Furthermore, do not attempt to recreate any of the situations described, as it may prove physically, legally, or financially harmful. And as always, thank you for listening to Unreggular Radio.
Good afternoon, Chuck Morse speaks. This is your host, Chuck Morse. We're doing a special edition of the program today, right up here at Unreggular Radio, Boston's biggest and most fastest growing internet radio station. You're welcome to join the conversation, 617-606-4122. That number again is 617-606-4122. Waiting for my first guest, that being Stephen DeVito. He is with, he's the author of a book, College Lending Solutions, ConsolidateFederalStudentLoans.com. This is certainly a relevant subject for a lot of our listeners, and that is what happens if you've graduated from college and you've got, like $100,000 in debt, and you're starting to default on the loan, which is, of course, unfortunately a reality today. What to do? Stephen has some good suggestions, some good advice in terms of how to put off the loan, how to consolidate, how to deal with the situation in such a way that it doesn't create a negative credit rating and whatnot, doesn't put you in the poorhouse either, as you, work to get a job. Unfortunately, as most of us, most of those listening know who are college graduates in this day and age, not that it ever was, but in this day and age, having a college degree is not necessarily an entree to a good job anymore. So we have to, in a sense, be crafty. I mean, I know as a musician, for example, that in the days when I was doing gigs and whatnot and teaching, that in order to survive in that world, you had to wear many hats, so to speak. You had to be in business. You sometimes had to have extra skills that you could conduct so you could continue to do what you loved and also do work. And even in the business of music, you could diversify what you're doing. You could promote, you could market, you could get into recording, you could get into the technical side of things, you get into the business side of things. And that the people that survived, unless you were really, really, really lucky, like you're, Led Zeppelin or something, those who really survived it were those who understood that and who knew how to do many, many different things in order to continue on with their craft. Anyway, as mentioned, Stephen DeVito hopefully will be up here shortly. This is my first day up here at Unreggular Radio. I've been in broadcasting now for many, many years, and right now I'm doing it actually from home. So to my way of thinking, and this is something that I think is becoming more and more obvious to anyone in this business and to the public in general, the Internet is the future. The Internet radio is the future, especially in talk, but also music. That more and more people are tuning into radio, both through their computers and through their Android devices, but also they're tuning into radio when they want to tune in. So you have the podcasts, and you've got the reruns, and you've got whatnot. And that's where it's going. That's where television is going. I mean, we know through the various devices. I'm showing my age here. I can't even remember what the heck it's called, but that is the future of radio, and particularly my business, which is talk radio. I think that we can note that in this past year, several big radio stations in Boston with regard to talk have pulled the plug on talk. They have gone black, and that includes both left and right, by the way. On the right, you had Rush Radio, which pulled the plug, I think, in September. On the left, you had Revolution Radio, which pulled the plug around the same time. And then just this past week, you had WTTK, or WTKK, excuse me, which was the preeminent FM talk station, supposed to be the big future of talk. They pulled the plug on their show. Now it's just music. It's all sort of piped in. So where does that leave talk radio in Boston? Is talk radio what it was? Is this city was the epicenter of talk radio in the 1980s and 1990s, certainly. And now we're down to basically one radio station is doing talk. That's being WRKO. And they only have 2 live talk show hosts, I believe, at this point, those being Jeff Kuhner in the morning and Howie Carr in the afternoon, both of whom I think are excellent. But that's it. I suppose late at night you've got Dan Ray at WBZ, but that's it. There is no more of a vigorous talk scene where you have people doing local talk and bringing people in, bringing Boston people on the air, local intellectuals, local, media people, local alternative types, local nutcases, local whoever, and putting them in the room and sitting them around the table and chatting. You don't have that anymore, except right here at this station, right here at Unreggular Radio. So I am looking forward, this being yours truly, Chuck Morse, I am looking forward to launching my program in the coming weeks right here at Unreggular Radio. And I think that my goal is to have the thing up and running by next month. And I can tell you, once I have this thing up and running here at Unreggular Radio, God willing, we're going to have some vigorous conversations right here that are going to include, Boston politics, Boston media, Boston theater, Boston musics. I'll have musicians. I might even draw from some of the great musicians that have been around back in the 60s and 70s whom we haven't heard from in a while. We'll put them on. We'll bring them up here, and we'll mix it up. I've done it before. And I can tell you, I am really, really looking forward to it.
why don't we take a brief break? And by the way, bear with me because I'm kind of ham-handed here. This is, I may like to talk and I may like to shoot my mouth off every day, but when it comes to doing the studio stuff and the buttons and the bells, and by the way, this station has a lot of that, and it's excellent. Somebody really has put a lot of work into this place because they've got a first-class radio studio, and the sound, I can't even get started when I talk about the sound. It is as good in this station as any sound on any major radio station in this city and in this country. But anyways, on that note, we'll take a brief break. By the way, you're welcome to call in. 617-606-4122. That number again is 617-606-4122. What is on your mind? And we are back. Chuck Morse Speaks. You're on the air. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to hear from you. What's up?
My name is Ro Farrell. I think my boss just walked in and you're talking with Steve now, but I wanted to give you a little bit of information. I loved your intro.
Thank you.
Federally insured student loans can be consolidated at any amount.
Well, stick with me in the second hour. We're going to have an expert on. Stephen DeVito is here, and he's going to be talking about that. Right now, we're going to be joined by Mark Stevens, who's bringing up the very important subject, which is, of course, driving under the influence and the laws around that, what to do and what not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for calling. All right. First caller. Let's have another. 617-606-4122 is the number. 617-606-4122 right here at Unreggular Radio, Boston's largest internet station, booming across the plains of Massachusetts and on through to America, as we reintroduce talk radio in what really is not only the cradle of talk radio, that being the city of Boston, the home of the late, great Jerry Williams, the late, great David Brodnoy, Gene Burns, all those great talk show hosts,
but in a real sense also the cradle, of course, of liberty, as we know historically, but the cradle of ideas when people used to get up on a soapbox and spout their opinions in the town commons, which, of course, is right down the street from this wonderful studio.
Mark Stevens is with us, attorney at law. Attorney Stevens, criminal defense attorney, specializes in DWI defense. Mark, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Mark, before we get into the topic at hand, which is a very serious one, could you give me a thumbnail sketch on the immediate history of DWI law? I understand that there's been some changes maybe in this state over the past, say, decade or so. What's going on?
Sure. There are a couple of things going on. One is they've broadened the number of people that they can prosecute by including controlled drugs, and now they're adding in non-prescription drugs. And the second thing is the level of punishment, the penalties, have been expanding to where they can include prior convictions to prosecute you today that might have occurred 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Okay, so, obviously, I think we can safely say that, like a lot of things in law, the basis of this is good intentions. I mean, you do have problems with people who are serious drunk drivers. We have a situation up in Lowell, in fact, a couple of days ago, I'm sure you know about this, where this man was involved with multiple cases. But perhaps the laws have been put in place as such where they treat everybody the same, and there are situations where it may not be appropriate.
That's correct. They sometimes, with the best of intentions, the legislature can just throw the net a little bit too wide and draw the mesh a little bit too tight, and they're dragging in people that are being punished like people who have committed much more serious offenses.
Right, and then if somebody was involved in the drunk drive incident, as you say, 30 years ago, and to have that drawn in is, I guess that it's perhaps a byproduct of our era of computers, where they can look at a computer and find out everything about you.
Sure, it is, but I think that the law should look differently at somebody who picked up an OUI when he was 18 years old and now picks up another one when he's in his 50s than somebody who picked up two within 3 years. Mm-hmm. That's a different...
it's a highly different situation, and it should treat the individual as a person and their unique circumstances rather than kind of this blanket enforcement of the law. And, of course, that's what you do as an attorney.
Right.
You take a look at the individual case and you present that to a judge, I assume, in the context of that case.
Right. And one of these things with mandatory sentences that is a problem is that it does treat everybody the same. Mm-hmm. And everybody's not the same. Their cases aren't the same. Their criminal history is not the same. And, it's sort of reactive legislation usually to something bad happening, and they'll toughen the laws, much like they do with the gun laws. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're over punishing people who really they shouldn't.
Now, is that what's going on right now in Massachusetts? Are there mandatory laws now that the judges' hands are tied and they have to do X, Y, and Z?
Oh, sure. With DWIs there are. Yeah, with OUIs there are. If a person gets a third offense, it's very fixed what the judge has to do to them if they're convicted. So what that does too is it crowds an already congested court system, because if the punishment is so great that you don't really have much to lose by fighting it, you're going to fight it and take a chance at not going to jail.
Right. Now, here you are, an officer of the court representing a client in front of in a judicial proceeding. How do you strategize helping a person deal with perhaps getting rid of some of these past problems and maybe putting the thing into context?
There are a couple of things that we do, Chuck. One is we look at the prior offenses to see if there might be some sort of constitutional blemish with those, to see if we might be able to vacate a prior offense that would alter the person's current standing with the court. And the other is we look at the facts of this case. Was the person really drunk this time?
Right.
Or did they get arrested because the cops ran their record and saw that they had a couple of priors and they threw the cuffs on them?
Right, okay. Now, that gets into, of course, the actual on-the-street question, which is if you are stopped by a police officer and you're not drunk, but let's say you might have had a couple of glasses of wine.
Sure.
Can you say no to a breathalyzer test?
Yes, you can. You can say no to a breathalyzer test. You can say no to the field sobriety test, too.
Well, that's very important that people hear that.
Sure. Because most people cannot pass field sobriety tests. I can't pass them. I don't drink, but I can't pass them. I can't physically pass them.
No, that's like making you walk like in a straight line, that kind of stuff?
Sure.
Okay.
Standing on one leg for 30 seconds while you count out loud, look at your foot, point it, keep your arms at your side. And, it's a funny thing that they will penalize somebody and fail them on that test if they raise their arms for balance. But if you watch our United States Olympics medalists in the Olympics and they're walking on this balance beam, they raise their arms for balance,
right?
And they do this for a living.
Oh, okay,
so
I guess. So
you're out there at the roadside, you can't win.
You can't win on that one. But you're in a situation where anybody is terrified. You know what is scared out of you when you're facing a cop on a street. It might be at night and you've been pulled over.
Sure.
Your heart's racing and you're like nervous. It's not easy to say no in a situation like that. I mean, if they tell you to get out of the car and do a breathalyzer.
No, it's not. It's a pressurized situation, and most people are raised to respect and obey law enforcement, and they think that they're not drunk. So, I'll do these tests. Surely the officer will be fair and let me go if I pass them. What they don't realize is that once he's asked you to take those tests, you're not going to pass them. He's probably already made up his mind to arrest you, and this is just part of the process of him gathering evidence against you.
Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, Attorney Stevens, but are you suggesting?
Okay, it's been done. It's been done.
And I'm not cross-examining. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm just your garden variety talk show host. Are you suggesting that people do not take these tests?
I think that they should think about whether they're going to take the test ahead of time. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you're a college athlete and you can pass these things, which some of them can, sure, go ahead. Okay. Because then you're going to have a very good case of some good field sobriety test, a probable arrest anyway, but you've got somebody that you're going to be able to explain to the jury, look how well this person did.
Okay.
If, though, you practice these tests and you look up what they are and you realize that I can't even do these in my living room, why on earth would you want to do them with the blue lights flashing, a cop holding your license, and a pair of handcuffs in his other hand? Why would you want to do them in that situation?
Yeah, it's a frightening situation, but you don't have to be intimidated when you say no.
No.
You can do it respectfully. Just say, I'm standing by my rights. I'm not going to take the test, period.
That's right. I want to call my lawyer, and hopefully that's me.
Then what happens?
You'll be arrested,
okay?
And there are consequences to it. But if you know that you're going to fail those tests anyway, think about it. He's asked you to take these tests because he thinks you're impaired by alcohol.
Right.
You fail them.
Right.
What choice does he have but to arrest you?
Right.
So if you try the tests and you can't do them, there's no sense in doing them at the side of the highway.
Okay. So then you're going to be arrested, probably either way, unless you really can pass these tests.
Sure.
Or if you absolutely have not had any alcohol at all.
Even then, you may not pass it.
And even then, you may not pass it. But if you don't do it, you're going to be arrested also. What happens then? They take your car, they take you downtown?
They tow your car, they take your license, they take you down, and now they're going to ask you to take a breathalyzer.
And then what?
Depending on what decision you make with the breathalyzer, they're going to suspend your license for a different period of time. If you take the test in Massachusetts, it's a 30-day license loss. Mm-hmm. In New Hampshire, it's a 180-day license loss. If you refuse the test, there are incremental penalties for that. So, say the first time you refuse it, it's 180 days. The second time you refuse it, it's 3 years. Third time you refuse it, it's 5 years. So, the repeat the person who repeatedly gets asked to take a breath test that refused, the punishments are going to ratchet up. So you need to know what's going to happen to you.
Okay, so, and by the way, we're not talking about somebody who's obviously outright, if you don't mind my using the expression, shit-faced.
Sure.
We're talking about somebody who might have had a drink or whatnot.
Right.
Now, can you refuse to take the second time you're asked in the police office
yes.
to take? You can.
Yeah, you can. And that's what I'm saying. These penalties will come in. In Massachusetts, the form reads, if you refuse to take this test, your license will be suspended for 180 days up to life. And the reason that it's worded that way is on a first offense, it's 180 days. Mm-hmm. The fourth refusal is life. So people who are arrested a number of times for OUI get smarter and give less evidence, and the legislature has recognized that, and they start to punish them more severely for refusing.
So then you've refused it a second time, and that is a bigger loss of your life. So that's just that's the way it goes.
Right.
But the fact is that in the bigger picture, you have not given them any evidence to proceed in a trial that could really result in your not only losing your license forever and even worse.
Right, or going to jail.
That's right. So
you can't drive in jail.
That's right. No, you can't do too much else either.
No.
Can't vote. Can't you lose everything.
Right.
So basically, the penalties are not as bad by saying no as by saying yes.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. You
Sure.
can get your license back quickly if you say yes and blow into it. Whatever the result is, you can get your license back in 30 days. However, you may be creating an untriable case for yourself if it's a third offense, fourth offense. You're gonna lose your license on that end of it from the court. You know what I mean? And
Okay.
just subject yourself to jail and probation and a bunch of other nasty consequences.
So I suppose that it's also a matter of being your own advocate, like you would be in any situation. You ask yourself, first of all, how much, if any, how much did I drink? Did I have 1 or 2 glasses of wine? And maybe by the time you're at the police station, perhaps your body would have absorbed it. You might not be as likely to have shown alcohol in your system. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't quite know how that works.
Right. And there's ways to figure that out, and there's ways to figure out how much you can have and be reasonably confident, if the machine is working, that it will read under an 08.
Okay. So that's something that you need to ask yourself as the process goes along.
Right.
Now, then, once you're in the police station, you call somebody like my guest right here, Mark Stevens.
Right.
What do you do, Mark?
What happens is it depends on what stage of the process they're at. Sometimes some police departments will allow them to ask me, should I take a breath test or not? And then we have, we're gauging the speech and things like that. And obviously somebody's listening to this too, so we don't ask too much about how much they've had to drink.
Right.
Because all of that stuff can come into play.
So in other words, you advise them like any attorney, and that they should know anyways, to not talk too much.
Right.
To just keep quiet, to don't answer questions. Obviously, that we know about the Miranda law. People have a right to not incriminate themselves. That's
Right.
just a standard
Right.
understanding. So don't.
The less you say, the best. I mean,
The less you say, and they're going to try to get you to talk.
Sure.
Even if casually. They play, maybe, I don't know, maybe, is this a movie cliche? They'll do the good cop, bad cop routine?
They're usually just good cops, and
okay.
they say, you seem like a nice guy. This isn't the end of the world, and get them to talk.
Right, they get you to drop your guard,
Yep.
and then before you know it, you're chatty, and then don't do it.
Sure.
These are not your friends.
Right. It's not a good time to talk.
That's right. Now, I mentioned when you were coming in, I remember the late, great Jerry Williams. I'm older than you, so you probably don't remember Jerry.
I do remember him, yeah.
But I remember he did this hysterical show on this topic where he talked about the rum cake defense. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that one, no.
Yeah, he talked about...
If it's good, I'll use it. I don't know. It's good.
No, he talked about this guy had rum cake at a dinner, and then he was out driving, and apparently there's an alcohol level in the rum cake.
Okay.
Jerry was very into anything around the automobile. He loved his cars, and he was like remember the seatbelt campaign and all of this. So he did some programming on this. Anyway, let's welcome in the callers. 617-606-4122, 617-606-4122. Mark Stevens is my guest, attorney at law. We're talking about how one can deal with a situation where they're being pulled over for drunk driving. And again, this isn't advocating drunk driving.
No.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a major problem, of course. I mean, I'm a supporter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, in that people are killed, and it's a terrible tragedy, obviously, and anybody can get killed any time. We're talking about situations where someone is either possibly being falsely accused, or that they're falling in the cracks in terms of perhaps an overly vigorous set of laws and mandatory laws that could end up being much more detrimental to them than need be, because they weren't actually endangering anybody.
Right.
They might have just had a drink or two, and then they're driving, and
they could get snared in a roadblock. They could have a plate light out. There might have been nothing wrong with their driving whatsoever, but there's some sort of
for whatever reason they're pulled over. It could be they could driving while black.
Yep.
They could whatever. They could just be pulled over because the cops view them as suspiciously. And by the way, would you take a breathalyzer test? No, thank you.
Right.
Is basically the answer to that question. So, Mark, you're called in. Tell me a little bit about your law firm. Do you have people, and how do you do that?
What I do is I do about 95% DWI defense and OUI defense. It's 100% criminal defense, and then the others are a mix of drug charges, gun charges, assaults, and so forth. Some appellate work, but it's all criminal. And in our state in New Hampshire, the laws are changing really very drastically on January 1 this year to include almost anything that you could be impaired by: NyQuil, over-the-counter medications, prescription medications, non-prescription medications that's worded in any chemical or natural substance or something like that. And, whatever they can get you for, they're going to get you for. Because
how can they prove that?
That's going to be an interesting question, because they're just going to have to start doing that now. The law just went into effect. Before, it had to be obviously alcohol or alcohol in a controlled drug, which makes sense. You don't want somebody.
But how can they even? I mean, are they going to look? I suppose they could look in your glove compartment and strip the car, but
right. Unless you tell them, which a lot of people do. This is the biggest mistake that somebody can make. Is I take OxyContin for pain. You don't want to tell them that.
And you don't need to tell them that. It's not their business.
No, they're going to ask you if you take medications. Tell them, I want to talk to my lawyer. That's it.
Right.
You don't need to lie to them if you don't want to. You feel comfortable lying to them, but you don't need to tell them anything either, because they are trying to incriminate you.
Okay, so people need to understand their rights. It's
right.
You're asked, as I said, as we mentioned. You're in an intimidating situation. You're there with a cop, and those people are people in a position of authority, people that we respect.
Right.
And they're asking you questions. Your general answer is yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir.
Right.
And there's a polite way, and you should always be very polite and courteous and calm, of saying, I don't want to answer that question.
Right.
Period. And you can do that. It's hard. But, it's protecting yourself. It's no different in a sense than, when you go to the doctors, and they give you a diagnosis. I want a second opinion. I want a third opinion. You don't necessarily do what they tell you to do.
Right.
You have to learn. I mean, this is just part of functioning. You have to learn to be your own advocate. And if you can't advocate in that you're in trouble, then you call a guy like Mark Stevens as an advocate. That's what you do. That's what lawyers do. They advocate for you.
Right.
So we're going to take a brief break. You're listening to Chuck Morse speak. We're at Unregular Radio. Chuck Morse Speaks. Welcome to the program, 617-606-4122, 617-606-4122. My guest is Mark Stevens, attorney at law. And, of course, you're listening to Boston's biggest and fastest-growing Internet station, heard all over, blasting across the fruited plain of Boston, as Rush Limbaugh likes to say, and even going national. I shouldn't mention that name here, because everyone here is liberal except me. But that's beside the point. Mark Stevens, attorney at law, is here. We're talking about DUI defense, and we're By the way, speaking, just a quick story. I think you might remember this.
Sure.
As a little political trick. Remember George W. Bush was running for president. The weekend before the election, all of a sudden, it comes out that he had been stopped and had a DUI arrest.
Up in Maine, I think,
up in Maine when he was a teenager.
Yeah.
And it made big news.
Right.
It was in the front, and everyone, DWI,
Yeah.
And it hurt him. And because this was like a dirty trick. It was like few days before the election.
Sure.
Somebody saved it. And I remember that they went up and they interviewed this guy up in Portland, Maine, who had been sitting on the story for like 20 years. And he was waiting for just the right moment to drop it. And he looked
like a bottle of fine wine. He's just saving it for special occasion.
He looked so happy. I never saw it. And he was one of these kind of scuzzy-looking guys with a gray ponytail, and a hippie-ish, sitting, looked practically homeless. And he's like, yes, finally got my thing. But in a sense, I mean, doesn't that show what can happen? I mean,
sure.
That should be something that we've judged, Bush running for president or any candidate. Here he is, 2 days before an election, and that matters? I mean, it didn't matter, but it probably cost him some votes.
It might have cost him some votes, but I think people recognize that people do things when they're young that are stupid, which they could take back, and I don't know. I'm not a politician or don't understand it or care about it too much, but I just watch what laws they make and keep an eye on them from that standpoint. But
that's right, and also, I mean, in a sense, just from a PR standpoint, the best way to deal with a situation like that is to say, yes, I made a mistake.
Right.
Everyone has at different times in their life, and I got caught and it was stupid.
Yeah.
And then you move on.
Yeah, and then he hadn't had another one for 30 years.
That's right, and he'd been sober, so it's not an issue. And again, we're not talking about situations here where somebody really is in trouble. As you mentioned, Mark, if you have somebody who really is an alcoholic and they're having problems and they're getting behind the wheel, is it the best thing for society to put them in jail?
No, it's not, because what you get at the end of the day is you're not going to lock them up and throw away the key forever. You can't do that. So you put somebody who's an alcoholic in jail for 6 months. What do you have at the end of the 6 months? You have a dry alcoholic. Mm-hmm. You have somebody who's going to get out of jail and drink again and do it again.
Right.
If you don't treat them, and sending them to Billerica or Middleton isn't treatment. It's just punishment for bare punishment's sake.
Right. Exactly.
So if you want to try and fix a problem with an individual, you need to fix what the problem is and not just separate them from society for a brief period of time. Long to them, but brief in the...
Now, don't judges do that? I mean, don't they say to someone, we're going to suspend your sentence, you have to have this treatment at this place?
Sure, they do. In some instances, first and second offenses, they'll say you've got to do a program, and if you violate it or you don't finish it, then you'd go to jail.
Right,
okay?
right.
But you get up into the third or fourth offenses, which are the people that end up on the front page of the Herald and the Globe.
Sure.
The people that have a real problem, and you look at what treatment they've received, and it's usually pretty minimal. It's really just lock them up, suspend their license, lock them up, suspend their license.
And that's not a situation. Is it a mandatory sentence? I mean, do they after X number of offenses?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay, so then this
is a range on them.
All right.
On each of them.
So in a sense, this is an argument against this whole idea of mandatory sentences.
Right. There shouldn't be mandatory sentences. It should be up to the judges who hear cases every day and can assess a person as an individual as to what the right or wrong thing to do with them is.
Right. Of course, and the other extreme in that is a very lenient judge who does nothing.
Yeah, we don't know too many of those.
Oh, okay. I mean, they're all fairly diligent, especially in these cases.
Especially if you start to see the multiple offenders. It's a situation where I think, just like the drug laws or the gun laws, where they need to look at why did this guy have a gun in his trunk? Why did he, should he be treated the same as a guy who's out preparing to commit a robbery? But in Massachusetts they are.
Now, Mark Stevens, you're an expert on the DUI defense. Your website, Bye DWI. Thank you. I'm trying to read this thing here. Bye DWI. Thank you very much. Your phone number, 603 893-0074. And you are the man to call if one does find themselves in a situation where they're being asked to take a breathalyzer, they're saying no to that, they're being taken downtown.
Or they've already been arrested and they've got a court date coming up. It's important to get on these things quickly.
Right.
You don't want to just wait and see what happens, because what happens if you just sit around and wait is not good.
That's right. I mean, it's sort of like, not to use the analogy again, but it's like the IRS. If they call you, don't ignore the call. Take care of it, but don't do it yourself. Have an expert handle it for you. But don't, you always have to talk to people. You have to stay within the system and work with everyone to make sure that ultimately there's a judgment made, and try to get the one that's most suitable to you.
Right. And what's the best result for this person? What's most important to this person?
Right. And I want to reiterate here, and I'm just going back to the beginning of our conversation, in that you are suggesting that people do not take the breathalyzer test or do not take the field test.
Field test, well, like I say, it depends on whether you can pass them or not. Some people can pass them. I've represented professional ice skaters, gymnasts that can pass these things. They could pass them if they were a .16.
Right.
But if you're not in the greatest physical shape, I don't know whether you are or not. I'm not.
Right.
I got bad knees, little sports injuries. I can't do any of these tests.
That's right. That's right. Most people can't.
So I wouldn't do them, but I would explain to the cop, I can't do these because I got two bad knees.
That's right. Good. So, yeah, I mean, exactly. Most people, you don't realize it, but you can't.
Right.
It's why risk it?
Right. So what's the point of me trying it if I'm going to fail it miserably and get arrested?
That's right. That's right. So you're better off getting the suspension, the brief suspension. In Massachusetts, 60 days, as you say.
Well, if you refuse a breathalyzer, it's 180 days. So.
Okay, so 180 days is better than a conviction.
Yep.
And life.
Right. It's a conviction. If you get this conviction, too, it can be used against you for your whole life. This thing gets buried with you when they're throwing dirt on you, they're throwing dirt on your docket sheet too. In Massachusetts, under Melanie's law, a conviction stays with you for your natural life.
Right.
So that's an important consideration. If somebody's, a young person, do you want to be facing this at some point in time when you're a grandparent, and you pick up another charge?
That's right. You have to protect yourself against conviction at all costs. I mean, ultimately it could happen because you're guilty, but the point is, don't give anything.
Right. Well, it can happen when you're not guilty too.
It can. It can. And I mean, the idea is that you do not go in and advocate for yourself. You have an advocate. You do not you do not kind of talk casually with people, because those things can be used against you.
They can. It's an unusual crime too, Chuck, in that it's really, if you think about it, the only crime that you can be convicted of based solely on the opinion of one person, solely on the opinion of one cop. I thought he was impaired, and that can be the only.
And that's it.
And that's it. Okay. Only you and God know if you're drunk.
Right.
Okay. The cop doesn't know. He's making the best guess he can based on the way that he's trained, but only you know whether you are or you're not. Okay? Mm-hmm. So without any kind of chemical test, or even with one, you're never going to know if this person was drunk or not. Okay? So it's a very unusual crime, so giving the least amount of evidence against yourself is the best way to go.
Now, when you are in a courtroom and you're confronted with this situation, an officer standing up and saying, in my opinion, this man was drunk, what do you say as a lawyer?
Well, there's a number of different things we ask him. How many times have you testified he wasn't drunk? Okay. Of course he's going to say he was drunk, or he wouldn't be here.
Right.
And we talk about the different things that the person did right, the different things that can cause a person's eyes to be red, different reasons why a person would put his foot down, while standing on one leg, and there's lots of innocent reasons for almost everything that they do. For almost
sure. Just who they are.
Yeah.
I mean, and ultimately, if there's no breathalyzer, then there is no hard proof. So in a sense, the burden of proof is on his side.
Right. And statements are bad too. We get bad statements too that can hurt us.
Okay. So
they're trained to ask you, "Hey, you feeling a little buzzed? You don't seem falling down drunk. Do you feel a little buzzed? A little buzz will get you convicted."
Don't use the word buzz.
Right.
When you're in front
or
of
respond to it or anything.
Yeah. Don't stay away from buzz.
Yeah.
Anything to do with buzz.
Buzz is bad.
That's right. Buzz is bad, and that could even be complicated by one of the great causes here at Unreggular Radio, which was the legalization of medical marijuana.
Right.
And that's something that people might, who are taking marijuana legally because of pain situations, they might say, go along with that. Don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't tell them about painkillers you're taking, because they can convict you based on driving while under the influence of something that you're prescribed. Even if you're taking it within the prescribed dose, you could find yourself arrested.
Right. And I don't know if you get into this, Mark, but there was just a report recently that apparently, even though medical marijuana is legal and now in Massachusetts, and it's been legal in California for about 5 years,
right.
Apparently the federal government, the Obama administration, is prosecuting people for marijuana, and even though it's legal in the states. So I don't know if you get into that.
They must not have anything better to do, Chuck.
I don't know what the deal is.
I thought they were focused on our guns, but
well, that's another thing coming down the pike, and I don't know if you're going to get into that one. But I think that just briefly on that, I think that the right to bear arms in Massachusetts, it's there, but the difficulty of that depends on the county.
Right, and it's really an illusory right down here in that. You need to know someone to get a permit. Law-abiding people have difficulty getting a gun in Massachusetts.
Do you have any cases around that subject?
With which?
I mean, with people who are being prosecuted for gun ownership or...
Oh, sure.
Right.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yeah, they get stopped for whatever reason, and there's a gun in the car, and they don't have a permit or, whatever state seal or FID card you've got to have at the current time. And in New Hampshire, you have a statutory right to a carry permit. So the opposite is true. If the cops don't want you to be issued a carry permit, they have to take you to court, and there's a proceeding that's held in front of a judge. And, it's very, very different up there. The Second Amendment has more teeth up there.
Right, sure.
So, now.
Right, exactly. And yet there's going to be there's a task force now that's going to be looking at federal regulations that may be...
They're trying to bring back the, what they call the assault, I'm making little air quotes, assault weapons ban, and,
right.
The 10-round magazines and all that they had before.
Right, and then that's a political question.
Right.
I don't know.
That's all it is.
I'm not sure where I come down on that one, but what I would ask you, though, as an attorney dealing with cases in Massachusetts, is what do you advise people who are gun owners in terms of how they should conduct themselves publicly when they have their gun? Should they carry their license? And
well, you have to. If you have a carry permit, you have to have it on you. You know.
So it's like a driver's license.
It's like a driver's license, and that will eliminate a lot of problems for you. The cops are just going to ask you if they find a gun, do you have a permit for this? I always carry mine, and to say, here, yeah, I've got one. It's current,
and that's good.
And that's good. And they'll say that's fine. You've got a right. If you've been authorized to carry it, you can carry it.
And if you stop for drunk driving and they find the gun with the permit, is that mitigating to?
That complicates things. Yeah.
Okay.
Because they can typically what they're going to do is try and take away your permit because you're intoxicated.
Right.
So.
Right.
So guns and alcohol should not mix.
No, they should not, for sure. This is a big subject here.
Right.
Anyway, Mark Stevens is my guest, attorney at law. We're talking about the very complex but important subject of DUI, how to advocate for yourself, how to defend yourself, and how to, when you feel that you're in a situation, contact an attorney like Mark to help you.
Right.
With that situation.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think can't be stressed enough right now, Chuck, is the fact that they are out to prosecute people who are not drinking for drunk driving, for impaired driving now because of the prescription drugs and because of now in New Hampshire non-prescription drugs. So things that you might think are very innocent to say to the cops, like, no, I'm not, I don't drink, but I take Vicodin for my knee, will now get you arrested for DWI. So you have to be very careful what you tell the cops. If you can avoid it, don't carry the prescriptions around with you because they're going to see them in the car, and your night's going to go downhill fast from there. So
interesting to know that. I don't think most people know that.
No, they don't.
And if they ask you if you're on prescription drugs and you refuse to answer that question, is that an arrest?
Maybe
it could be.
It could be. I mean, they can't smell anything. You can't smell Vicodin. But if you won't answer the questions, they may arrest you. But think about the case that they've got when they go to court. No answers, no smell, no nothing. I think they're impaired by something. I wrote a blog article about being impaired by spinach a couple of weeks ago that got some attention from people. But
how can you be impaired by spinach?
You can't be impaired by spinach, but the cops could say you were.
But if you are taking Vicodin and you are in a kind of a scenario here, charged with that, you're not going to be prosecuted for that. I mean,
you could be. Sure, you could. Yeah, sure, you could.
A legal prescription?
Yep.
That a doctor told you have to take?
The doctor told you could take, that you take every day, that you're used to, that you could run your radio show, you could do your job, you could drive. If the cop sees you going over a yellow line, he's going to think that's the reason, and you're going to get arrested.
Big Brother's coming.
Big Brother's coming. Big Brother's here.
No, that's a big one. I mean,
that's a huge thing that people really need to know about. Don't answer those questions, even though it's innocent, because you think, well, I'm in compliance with the law. I'm doing what my doctor told me to do. I'm taking things like I'm supposed to, taking them responsibly. I'm driving fine.
Right.
I had a plate light out, and now I'm being asked these questions. Okay.
Yeah.
The good answer to the questions is I don't want to answer the questions.
That's right, and I think that if there's anything that we can impart from this interview, it's that. I mean, that don't answer questions, don't engage in small talk, don't just ask to see an attorney, and that's it. It's
right.
I mean, if you're really going to be pulled over and you're in trouble like that, and they want to bring you in,
right?
Don't give them anything extra other than what you absolutely have to, which is nothing.
And there are lots of occasions now, Chuck, where people are being stopped in roadblocks because there's federal grants for roadblocks in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. They do them on the seacoast up in New Hampshire and in Quincy down here. And, so somebody could just be driving and be pulled into a roadblock for no reason whatsoever, and now they start to get interrogated.
Now, Mark, I don't want to get into, touchy areas here because, and I don't know if you know this, but are there certain times when they might be more oriented toward having these roadblocks, and are there certain roads which might be more amicable to those?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What are they?
Yeah, Route 1 in Seabrook, down in Quincy. They do it on, what's the name of the street down the shore?
You mean the bridge that goes over the Neponset River? I've seen that.
Yeah, the cops call it a choke point because there's no way to get out of it. So you're driving, you see it, you can't get away from it. Those are the areas
that's
that they
going
select.
like from Quincy, because I'm from Quincy, so I know what you mean. So that's going from Quincy to Boston over the Neponset River Bridge.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So That's good information.
It's good information.
And is there a time that they might be more oriented towards setting these things up?
Yes, between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. is when they usually set them up.
We can't get in trouble for talking about this, right?
No.
Okay.
I talk about it all the time. I put it on my blog. I tweet it. I tell people when I find out about one, hey, watch out. Here they are.
We should set up a special website.
They're out in public. You know, they're performing their job out in public, and there's people that don't want to deal with them that have not been drinking. They just don't want to be stopped by the police and hassled.
And they're basically doing random pullovers.
Right.
Plus, I know that there's an issue where there's obviously these speed traps, which might serve a double.
Sure.
Like there's one actually in Brookline where there's like a decline and there's a tiny little sign that says 30.
Oh, yeah, a friend of mine got one over there.
Yes, and if you're going 35. They're down there just over at the old 7-Eleven waiting for you and pulling you over.
Sure, and that's a great use of government resources.
I think that this is. I don't like to go into conspiracy theories, but I get the sense that this is a bit of a fundraiser for the government. I mean, there's always a certain time of the month, or maybe every other month, where they're out there with these speed traps, and they're out there with ticketing and parking tickets. It's like they descend.
Yeah.
And
it's like between the 80th and the 90th day of a quarter,
right? and I'm not. And I know that
it's a coincidence.
My mentor is Jerry Williams, and he used to talk about this also. He says that they'd have to bring in a certain. He never could prove it, and I'm not saying it as a fact.
Sure.
But the rumor is that they have to bring in a quota of tickets, and not that they have to legally or they have to, but it's kind of an unspoken, maybe a kind of an ethos of the police that. Hey, you're not writing up enough tickets. What's going on here? So I don't know if.
Well,
that's
look at
true.
it's not really a conspiracy, but it's a kind of a use of funds thing. Look at the roadblock grants that they get. If you don't produce enough arrests on a roadblock, you don't get another roadblock grant on the next holiday. So,
right. I guess it's like any other government agency.
Right. So that's why your 07s get arrested in a roadblock. When they go back to the station and blow and they're under.
Yeah.
You tend to arrest more people. You tend to field test more people because you got to look busy.
And then you have you go to get more money for the grants, and you get more. I'm not to criticize. I'm not anti-government here, but that's how government works. You get an agency, and they have to show we do X number of cases every year, and we want to do more, or else we don't get.
Right, and we need 12 officers to run this thing. Okay, so it's overtime for everybody. It's federal money, so somehow that's free, I guess. I guess there's an unlimited reservoir of that for roadblocks. And they have to go back and report to their masters that they got this many arrests or they're not going to get another grant. So
I don't know. It could be a little – one could really be going out, putting their neck on the line to do this, but it would be interesting for somebody to actually set up perhaps a website that actually lists when and where these things happen that people can look at before they go out for a drive.
Well, one of the things that is interesting, I took a case up to the New Hampshire Supreme Court on the police having to advertise before they conduct a roadblock, and in New Hampshire they do.
Oh, that's good.
In that case, though, unfortunately, they said that advertising in one newspaper one day in advance in another town was good enough.
Yeah, right.
But
a little tiny, like, classified
in there, like with the obits and people that have lost money, Right. So, but now they hold press conferences because they're proud of these things, and they'll say, we're going to be out there.
Okay.
So there's nothing wrong.
Well, that's fair. I mean,
it is fair.
If the public is notified, fine.
Right. Right. If you know it's out there,
sure,
you can choose whether to drive through it or not. Okay. That's a different story than sneaking up on people. But the problem is a lot of people obviously don't know it's there because I don't think anybody in their right mind would want to drive through the thing.
No way. So, Mark, we've reached pretty much the end of the segment, so I'd like you to just, again, let people know how they can reach you, where they can find out more information.
Sure thing. My website is bybyedwi.com. That's byedwi.com. My telephone number is 603-893-0074. I'm in Salem, New Hampshire. I practice in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And my practice area is primarily OUI and DWI defense.
Mark Stevens, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right. We
Thanks,
shall
Chuck.
be back after these messages. Hour number 2, Stephen DeVito will be with us, ConsolidateFederalStudentLoan.com. Stay tuned for these messages. Chuck Morse Speaks. We'll be back.